and welcome to Console Room 2024, year 11. We welcome you to our virtual panel, classic show TV shows that don't hold up. We encourage you to check out many of the virtual, if you're watching from home, check out many of the cool virtual panels that we have going on. If you're watching us from the actual convention, have fun. Hope you're having a great and safe time. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with introductions. I am Gordon Dymowski. I am the lead organizer for Chicago Doctor Who Meetup. I am also a professional writer, and not coincidentally, I have an essay in the latest edition of Outside In Regenerates. So go pick that up where your fine Doctor Who books are sold. Um, and I'd like for either one of my illustrious guests to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Kathryn Sullivan. I write middle grade science fiction and fantasy. I've also got an essay in Outside In Regenerates and Children of Time, Companions of Doctor Who, but I will have copies at Council Room of Outside In Regenerates.
And I'm Arnold Blumberg. I'm the owner of ATV Publishing, which has published Outside of Regenerate. This was not planned as a commercial, honestly. And I also have an essay in it. I don't know how that happened, but whatever. But that book is available now. It's our little 60th anniversary tribute, but mainly I'm here just to chat about TV shows today.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Again, prepare for a wild ride. We're going to go straight to it. Okay, let me just put the question out there. What classic TV shows do you think don't hold up?
We need more than an hour.
Okay. Well, let me
I mean, I
back.
guess we'll start by saying, obviously, like what we're talking about here is the simple fact that, you know, we evolve, we grow, we become more aware of how we communicate, how we reflect other human beings. And we're in a time right now where I think a lot of us are quite correctly reassessing the things that we grew up with and have lived with all of our lives that are deeply problematic or flawed or unfair to other people. And you have to be willing to let things go and move on and learn to communicate better and to show dignity and empathy for other people. And so as a result, a lot of our television that we've all grown up with is stuff that's best left in the past, and we move on. Some people have a hard time with that because they're really tied into the nostalgia, their childhood. And I've struggled with that. Shows that I've revisited and then I go, oh my God, this show, I can't. But that's how we get better, I think. So there's a lot. I mean, I'm sure we'll come up with many of them.
Yes, definitely agree. Because I mean, I was going through some of the shows I grew up with and really, really liked, and like I loved I Spy when it first came out. As the fact that it covered, it was kind of like a travelogue, and you had a black and white group working together. And for a while, I've been avoiding it because I got the DVD set because nostalgia. And then Bill Cosby hit the news. So I've been avoiding it a lot because I can't watch that without going, oh my gosh, what happened with that man, poor man.
Yeah, and
Watched a few episodes last night just to, remind myself, yeah, there's a travelogue. Oh, you've got the white guy being told to go talk to the female spy. Okay. And the black guy has to go pick up the luggage.
Yeah.
Right.
On the other hand, they had an elderly character actor she's been well known, but she was treated as a competent spy, and both the young males respected her and grieved when she was killed because, of course, the female husband died. But I mean, again, it's looking at them in the past and going, there's these good things and there's, oh dear.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a mix, and it's an unfortunate thing that's the messiness of reality. It's a mix. I've had so many debates with people about, and not debates even, but just sensible discussions about Star Trek. Like, oh, we all hold Star Trek up so high as this progressive show. It's also a deeply, deeply misogynistic show, and to an extent extremely racist as well. Shall I bring up the Paradise Syndrome, for instance? But it's also a progressive show for 1966 to 1968. And then at the same time, a very racist, misogynist, backward show, steeped in the era in which it was, and that can never be fixed. And you have to recognize that. And like you're doing, Kathryn, like, can you watch a show that you loved as a kid that has someone in it that you know to be deeply problematic? Or, for me personally, I have a feeling I can no longer separate art from artist. If I know someone's done a thing, I can't do it. But that's a personal choice. If you sit in the privacy of your own home and enjoy something you used to love and can still find something to enjoy, that's your decision. You can still do that. And separate yourself, separate the art from the artist yourself. But that's a personal choice. And there are so many shows like this. It's all of it at once. It's very difficult you can't separate it.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of take it in a slightly different direction, because I think the art and artist, separating the art from the artist is a very complicated conversation that if we had hours, I'd love to do it like a 5-hour panel on it. I kind of looked at it from the standpoint of, are there certain attitudes and certain like historical tropes that maybe just don't fit? And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate from people, but the I Love Lucy show, it's good for in bite-sized pieces on YouTube, the physical comedy bits, but everything else, it's the wife wants to do something, the husband's like, no, you can't, and the wife is okay, conniving. But talking about things that I liked when I was younger that I don't get now, there are two shows from the late 1970s. So yeah, you've got your the original Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers. And it's not just because of the sexism. It's for me, it's just the whole ethos. Like, I love Battlestar Galactica when I was a kid. And after the revamp in the early 2000s, I tried to rewatch it. And I'm thinking, what the hell did I see of this show? But I was 10 years old, it was that whole post Star Trek Chariot of the Gods mania. And so I couldn't enjoy it on the same level. Just like Buck Rogers, it was a good show, but when you're 10 years old, you look at it and go, oh wow, spaceships. But you look at it now and it's like, okay, yeah, there's the infamous episode where Gary Coleman is like a kid from the 20th century who miraculously is revived, and they're talking about, because there's no meat on Earth, I guess everyone's vegan. Hey, let's eat lizard burgers. Like it's that kind of
Yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of times, I mean, another show that I find at least maybe doesn't quite hold up, that's a little bit later, is the original Law and Order. Because if you look at like the first 5 years, it's very much a the politics are a little, like, we would look at it now and like there's an episode where Jack McCoy is talking to um a person of color. I think it's a woman of color, and it's about a case with racist overtones. And Jack McCoy says to her, well, maybe you're the racist. Yeah, a white dude saying that to a black woman, no. But when you look at, because like the first half, it's kind of dealing with that, ripped from the headlines, and some of it's a little bit more debatey. And then you look at everything from the second half, from um, kind of 2001 on, there's a real shift in terms of dealing with the war on terror in very there's every season there's an obligatory, not all Muslims are bad kind of episode. Um, and then with the recent revival, you can tell that the writers, who are a much younger crowd, are really trying to inject some thoughts about diversity and different perspectives and more nuance. Unfortunately, the format, because it's half police and half courtroom, doesn't really accommodate that. If you've got 40 minutes, you're not going to get a lot of nuance. So I think that's one show that doesn't quite. I mean, I mean, my personal favorite Law and Order is Criminal Intent, because a lot of the cases are focused on the criminal and seeing one thing through rather than seeing the justice system summarized in 40 minutes. So that's one that I don't really think holds up.
I would agree. And also, but for me, it's a more global thing that I've become much more aware of for myself over the last few years, that it's not that I felt differently in the past. I just never really devoted as much time to thinking about it as I do now. But I've gotten to a point where I'm very, very anti anything that celebrates law enforcement, military, anything like that. I feel that the Law and Order shows, as Dick Wolf being the successor to the Jack Webb era of, say, the Adam 12 Dragnet kind of stuff that started all this, they have a lot to answer for perpetuating certain ideas about police and law enforcement that are just not only deeply, deeply wrong, but really offensive and have contributed to the kind of culture we have. And I mean, I've really gotten to the point, it's like, if we just eliminated all police everywhere, it would improve things enormously overnight. So that's me being incredibly political on a console room panel. But so I think that Law and Order suffers enormously. And particularly, like you said, you look back at any show with a police procedural that is trying to be on the edge, and they are inevitably being racist, misogynistic, ethnically skewed, deeply distrustful of the poor and anyone that
profiling.
Yeah. So yeah, it all suffers. And if you go back to the earlier stuff, the Adam 12s, the police,
the Adam 12
that stuff is
Dragnet,
garbage. Yeah.
The Adam 12 and Dragnet, I think, very much are outdated, because it's not even basically even though they were taken from the files of the LAPD and historical context. The LAPD worked with Jack Webb to improve their image. I will defend Emergency, because I grew up with that show, and Emergency was like, looking at paramedics, you didn't see them on TV at all. And I will defend to the death I will defend to the death the fact that I think Kevin Tye and Randolph Mantooth did a lot for that particular field.
Well, people working in medical rescue and emergency, that kind of stuff, that's a whole different kind of topic, and much more itself complicated as well, but certainly not the same kind of thing. Firefighting also, not there are other issues in there as well, but not the same either as dealing with police. So that's certainly true. I will throw out one, though, that I just recently saw again. It's another example of, like, I had no idea in my head. I was never a huge fan. It was like many other shows I saw a lot of, and it's just part of the pop culture landscape. But I used to see Mission Impossible all the time, and I love Peter Graves and Martin Landau and the whole team. And so I watch a lot of stuff now on Pluto TV, and everything's streaming all the time, and everything has its own channel. So you put Doctor Who on for 47 hours, which is nice, or like Mission Impossible. And I've just occasionally been putting it on, and I mean, oh my God, damn, if every episode of Mission Impossible doesn't have at least one character in brown or blackface at some point during the story. I mean, just relentlessly demonizing people, Asians and people from the Middle East, and the one of the great 20th century American boogeymen, putting these people in the position of villain. But to see the so-called heroic characters, and therefore then the actors, whether it's Landau or then later Leonard Nimoy, constantly slathering themselves with color and masquerading, it's so deeply uncomfortable. To say nothing of the white actors constantly cast in every episode who are supposed to actually be the ethnicity that they're playing. So it's all over the place. And I saw like a couple of them in a row, and I was like, I can't look at this thing anymore. This is over. This is totally over. And that's the kind of thing, there are shows that you just have to put back on the shelf. And it's the way it is.
And there's a lot of shows that really weren't set up to be binged or marathoned, because there are a number of shows, decades ran Beauty and the Beast, which I loved. And then you watch several of them on their own. It's like, oh my gosh, again, they doubt each other again.
Right.
It's like, things that were really good if you were every other week. Great. binge together. No, they just aren't set up for that. Like you
Yeah.
were saying with I Love Lucy, little bits it works really well, and other ones it's like, oh, you feel like oversaturated there. You overdid the Halloween candy type of idea.
Okay.
And another one I watched that I had to go back and look because I was in the big spy movies way back when, and Detective and Honey West was one of my favorites because
Oh yeah.
a female character they were basically trying to set her up as a contrast to the Avengers because they were both filmed around the same time. And oh yeah, she had an ocelot, endangered species. Thank you. She could do judo.
Oh, yeah.
Her partner was dumber than her, which in little bits are really good. But man, the sexism in there and getting the male gaze constantly. You can't
That Anne
that.
Francis.
Yes,
Honey
that was
West?
Anne Francis.
Yeah.
If I may leap in for just a second, touching on Arnold's point about Mission Impossible, that is a problematic show that was also problematic at the time for two big reasons. The first was the idea that you have a group of American intelligence operatives literally going in and infiltrating and disrupting foreign governments, especially the perception of governments that were third world. So what they ended up doing was in like the last season or two, they ended up going after gangsters. So a lot of Italian stereotypes, they sounded like Mario. They ate a lot of pizza and pasta.
Right.
And some of my best friends are Italian, so I know that's not. But yeah, I think there are shows that don't hold up because they are so of their time that they reflect those ethos, and we kind of look and go, no. And then there are shows where I think they don't hold up because I think just by the nature of what they're trying to do, and they have very outdated, not on the racist and sexist tones, but just outdated concepts. Like a perfect example, Leave It to Beaver. And I know I'm reaching back a while, but a 1950s family comedy is not going to resonate with a 90s with a 2023 family. I don't even know if it's. I think the audience for that now would be the kind of people our age who maybe watched it because they were homesick from school and there's nothing else on, not someone who was there at the beginning.
Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best. Yeah,
I mean, there's
that time.
And another thing is in the last few years in particular, Natalie and I really got into watching Mystery Science Theater and Riff Track stuff like nonstop. And they're steeped in all these, particularly all these old 50s educational shorts that are all about, what's it like having dinner with your family? What should you be doing out on a date and all that. And it's all those sitcoms of that era too. All of it is all a part of I'm not necessarily saying everything was part of a very carefully delineated plan that was all orchestrated by the same group. This is not some Illuminati kind of thing, but it was a very concentrated effort by a lot of people post World War II to nail down a particular idea of what they thought would be functioning American society and the roles that people were supposed to remain in. Especially in the case of things like women who had found that being in the workplace is actually pretty nice and having independence is good, and getting them back in the kitchen and trying to justify that. And so many of these sitcoms are a time capsule of this insanity of, this is what the American family is and nothing else. And so naturally that doesn't travel. You can't map that to any kind of reality. The thing is, it wasn't even real then. It was garbage then, but it was just fantasy. So, we grow and evolve. The sitcom really, though, you talk about shows that don't hold up. The sitcom as a genre in general, I think, is one of the worst genres, and certainly in American television, as something that has no staying power whatsoever. The same rhythms, the same jokes, And if you do enjoy them in the era in which they air, I would argue that they're not going to last beyond that unless you grew up with them and want to revisit them. Like you were saying, Gordon, we want to revisit them. But these shows age horribly,
Yeah, like
immediately.
And I've got a good example of a more contemporary sitcom that I don't think holds up. And I think we'll all agree on it. Big Bang Theory.
Yes.
At the time, I got teased by a lot of my friends because I was like, yeah, this is basically Seinfeld with comic book references. There's the humor is all like, look at these people, how wacky they are. And I had one person actually tell me, well, if I didn't like it, I didn't get it. And it's like,
right.
I'm kind of glad that now it's kind of like nobody really talks about it. And it's because it wasn't that good. I stand vindicated. I think I have two people on this panel who agree with me. Would that
I
be
never was a fan of it because it felt like the show was basically trying to laugh at.
Yes,
definitely.
It was, and the thing is, we know if you really ever delved into it and know anything about, particularly one of the co-creators, Chuck Lorre, you'd know that despite the arguments to the contrary, it was very much a show made by the cliched bully in the schoolyard who was poking fun at the geeks and the nerds and pretending that the show is on their side, but really it was about, aren't they funny because they're so weird and so different and, let's say, neurodivergent? And I've seen, and the thing is, I've seen arguments on many sides about, for instance, Sheldon as a character who is at once, to some people, good to see, and maybe if someone feels that they felt seen in some respects because of Sheldon, you can't take that away from them because that's valid. But I do know there are also people who felt like, well, he was also, they felt a simplistic representation of some of that his evolution as a character was not true to what that sort of person would be, and that it was unfair representation. So I guess, again, it's complicated. I don't feel that character represented me, so I can't argue for or against. There are people that loved Sheldon, and if they did, that will always be something they can appreciate. And if there are people that hated it, that's valid too. But I felt, for me, it was a mean-spirited show that was primarily, the comedy came out of the audience laughing at them, like Kathryn was saying. Yeah. And still, it lasted, what, like 11, 12 years?
Well,
I mean, it's massive hit. What do we know, right? So
yeah. Well, let me kind of maybe springboard off of that point. When it comes to any kind of media, whether it's stuff from the past, things are going on now, do you have I want to open this to you on Pyrodol. Is there like a line in the sand where because no piece of media is ever perfect. There's going to be biases but is there ever a line in the sand where you go with a show like to Kathryn's point about I Spy, that yes, Bill Cosby's in it, but when you actually watch it, you find that, like, okay, the white character has a lot more autonomy than the black character. That the black character is always. But is there like a line in the sand where you kind of go like, I can accept so much, but no further? And you don't have to define it. Just, is there a line where you go, or do you just kind of go, nope, sorry, don't like that, throw it away?
I think there's a line. I think it's a case by case thing. I think, like I was saying earlier, I wouldn't blame anyone for, in the privacy of their own home, wanting to enjoy something that meant something to them personally, even if it's problematic. And I don't think you should necessarily feel bad about yourself. Keep in mind, everything I'm saying today might change tomorrow too. My feelings about a lot of this have been evolving rapidly over the last few years. I've changed in a lot of the things I would even have said to you a couple years ago about it. But what I would say today is, I don't think anyone should be faulted for wanting to revisit something that they love, but also no one else should be subjected to something that is problematic. There are things we shouldn't be revisiting. There are things that definitely should be put away and never seen again. To step away from TV shows for a minute, great example would be Gone with the Wind. Yeah. One of the greatest movies ever made. It's garbage. It was an entire movie created to promote the lost cause crap from the South.
Mm-hmm.
It's racist. It's a terrible, terrible movie. It should never be aired or streamed again. And there are things I think like that. And the argument that I would then say to people saying, well, what are you saying? Put things away. It's like, well, all I'd say is this. Consider how long we have been in a culture where straight white men have determined 99.9% of everything. Wouldn't it have been nice to hear from some other voices once in a while? And if we do put some things away and say, look, we've had 100 years of that, how about we stop? What room will that provide for other people and other voices to be heard and for other media to be created? Maybe it's a good thing. So I think there's a line, and I think there are things that should definitely be no, like you were saying, Gordon, no, can't deal with that. No, put it away. And there are things that I guess if you grow up with and you think, yeah, no, this is problematic. Oh my God, this was when I was a little kid. And well, if it's available and you can watch it, you can still watch it. But maybe also in your heart, in your mind, you realize it's complicated. And there are also things that are wrong about it too.
Because like earlier this year, I had participated in a podcast rewatch of The Prisoner, available Resident of Collinwood on YouTube, so you can go check it out right now.
I'm just now starting to watch The Prisoner for the first time all the way through.
Okay, and I had watched it, it was one of my favorite shows growing up.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I did a full rewatch, I was kind of like, whoa, this is intense. And watching it to discuss with others, it's the couple things that really kind of struck me, was that one, that McGowan is very intense and he was a control freak all over.
Yeah.
And watching some of the behind the scenes stuff in a documentary called Don't Knock Yourself Out, like he physically attacked one of his co-stars. He also one of his co-stars, he also was verbally abusive to one of the directors. And in the text, there's like at one point, there's a cat that reveals that he's hiding somewhere. And his response is, never trust a woman, even the four-legged variety.
Just saw that, yeah.
Okay. And for me, it was figuring out, okay, I would never say nobody should ever see this again, because I don't feel like that's my right. I feel we all have a choice to determine what we watch. But to me, it didn't hit the mark of, like, I knew going in, it's late 60s. McGowan was a very devout Catholic. He was kind of like Mel Gibson without the more overt, incidents with the police. But I could kind of go, okay, yeah, this still has value for me, but I approach it knowing the fact that it is a very flawed piece of art by a very flawed individual.
Yes. And I think the thing that and I don't mean this, well, I guess it's going to sound like that anyway, like to pat yourself on the back. But I guess I found the last few years I've been sad about it too. There have been things I've been revisiting from my childhood only to discover how terrible they are. And it makes me sad. And like I was saying, it's like there shouldn't necessarily, at least the way I feel right now, there shouldn't necessarily be a reason why you couldn't, privately revisit something, knowing what you know, but still feeling that emotional connection. But I find that the more I become aware of the problems, the less I can revisit it, because I just can't stomach the idea of trying to enjoy something that I know is that flawed. And I think it's a testament to maybe our better awareness of some things that we do have the capacity to reevaluate. I think it's important to reevaluate things and realize you can't necessarily enjoy it the same way anymore, or maybe at all, because you're aware of it now. Another one, by the way, I grew up, I love Cheers. It's like one of the great sitcoms of all time, right? And it's like 80s into the early 90s. And in weird way, I mean, that's plenty old already now. I feel old enough, but it's like you think of that and you think, well, how bad can that be? That's not like a show from the 50s. And I can't even tell you what it was. I don't remember now, but I put that on for the first time in many years and thought, Cheers. And I put it on, literally within 2 minutes, there was a joke at a female character's expense and a joke about that was transphobic. And I can't remember the lines, nor really should I repeat them anyways. It doesn't matter. But like within a couple minutes, and I turned it off immediately. And I thought, I can't believe. And the weird thing is, I used to watch Cheers all the time, over. And you know how it is with repeats. We used to see it over and over and over again. And my mother and I loved Cheers. The moment the transphobic joke happened, I remembered that line vividly. Like I'm remembering it as I'm watching it, right? I didn't remember it in advance of it, but the moment it happened, oh yeah, that. And I thought, I can't believe I ever watched that. And either thought that was funny or acceptable or any, and I thought, but that's the way this is that there's a minefield in our past of things that are wrong, and it's good to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's plenty more wonderful things out there, and many more voices to be heard, that if we just clear the way a little bit, we will hear those voices and get different and better pieces of media. And that's just the way it is. Doctor Who itself has deeply problematic stuff in its past. And look at it now. It's an evolving text, and it should be.
And we didn't notice it at the time because we were immersed in that culture. And there were a lot of things there that we just took for granted. There was no use in saying anything against it because we'd be the only voices speaking up.
Right. And one of the things I have to say, I think is important to bring up in a panel like this, is I think one of the things that I find most often, and I'm sure by now there's at least a couple things, maybe one or all of us have said in this panel, that have probably made somebody watching this right now angry or sad, or that they don't want to hear from us anymore, which is fine, because that's the way it is. Even in the Doctor Who community, I'm sure there are people who'd be angry about some of the things we're saying. But what I would say is, I see that reaction a lot from people that I would otherwise consider to be self-aware and liberal and progressive and empathetic to their fellow human beings. And yet when you bring up that one show, they will start railing against you, saying, I watched that and that's nothing, I'm going to keep watching. There's a defensiveness that comes in when you're a fan of something that gets triggered so powerfully when someone dares to tell you that thing that you love is deeply problematic. And the trick is, you've got to learn to be aware that that is not a personal attack on you. Like Kathryn just said, we are all a product of the culture we've grown up in. We've all been programmed. And to a certain degree, we're all trying to do our best to get away from that, but it's all still in there. And you just have to be aware that if someone points out to you that something you've loved for many years has a problem, it's not that you're flawed or that you're wrong. You are wrong, however, if you refuse to acknowledge it and be aware of it. Then the choice, like Gordon said, is yours to make about enjoying it any longer. But it's that defensiveness that I think prevents more conversation about this kind of thing.
Right.
And I know that all of us are fans, and that fan connection can be very poisonous.
Yeah, and like I've dealt with this with the meetup, in that there's always a very contingent of people who will complain that the show is too woke, or there were some complaints with the Abominable Snowman, the animated reconstruction, because they decided to design the Asian characters to look a little more Asian when they were actually Tibetan, let's be exact, Tibetan, because in the original episode they were all white dudes. In fact, in one of the behind the scenes featurettes, one of the actors is talking with pride about how they put like little styrofoam things on his eyelids and they use tape to cross it up.
Yeah.
And I always want to say, understand something. First, the Doctor Who audience is much bigger now than you can ever, we're no longer just, we've gone past those late teens, early 20s who watched it on PBS in the 80s, or who, got videotapes from that one friend in England. So it's bigger than you are. Secondly, you do understand that for every that in case of like, Abominable Snowman or Talons of Wing Chiang, there are there are people that's attacking, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
Yep.
Um, I had someone defend it as a historical trope. Let me just point out, go research Sax Romer. Go
Yes.
we'll be right here. Just hit
Very
pause,
much so.
go. Okay, thanks. Now you know.
Never
But
mind the fact that you can also kind of lump in the celestial toy maker to that one.
mhm.
You want to
Well,
start delving. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah.
I'm making a point, Arnold. I appreciate your enthusiasm,
No, no,
but
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
the other thing is you don't own Doctor Who. You own your feelings about it, you own your reaction to it, you own your opinions about it, but you don't own Doctor Who. You don't do things like say, like I was having a conversation about Vertigo, and someone said, "Well, what they should have done is they should have had Jimmy Stewart send a note to this guy and let him know." And it's like, no, no, you don't get to second guess any piece of work. You assess it on its own merits as a piece. You don't get to counter. I think Doctor Who now, actually, I would say over the past couple of years, the new has been making a concerted effort to at least integrate that kind of more progressive thinking. I mean, when Russell T Davies took over in 2005, there was a huge fan furor over the gay agenda because he was in. Never minding the fact that Russell T Davies, his first success was a show called Queer as Folk. And I think sometimes if you're trying to deal with, in the late 60s, there was a movement towards relevance, which would be, we'd call it, in the 90s, you'd call it politically correct. Now we'd call it woke, but it's 60s-ish. So if you were lucky, you got shows like Ironside that at least tried to, it was a cop show. It was more of a detective show about a guy, he's in a wheelchair, he's got younger cops. But you could argue that that was a serious effort. And after a while, they kind of went, okay, we're a cop show again. On the other end, you have the Mod Squad, which was produced by Aaron Spelling. All I need to say. But I think back to Doctor Who, it's very easy to start pointing and saying, oh, it's woke, oh, it's criticizing, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. No one's forcing you to watch Doctor Who. And if you're thinking that Doctor Who is too woke and you're watching this and you're part of the council room, you might want to think maybe you need to kind of step back and maybe reevaluate the life choices that brought you to this point. And yes, I'm going to start some online. I'm starting some online fights now because we're all getting along. Like, um, okay. Now to keep up this fight, Kathryn, um, do you scoop the centers out of Oreos or do you eat them with them?
Oh, well, we can't go to something that controversial and that
Oh,
will lose everybody. That's just
Okay, but back to classic TV shows that don't hold up. First, also, if you're watching, you can like, share, subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also leave your comments as to classic TV shows that you think don't hold up, because we'll all check it out later and we'll leave our responses.
Mhm. Trying to think of some other things that I mean, you can find something from any era that doesn't. And the thing is, based purely on the title of this panel, too, by the way, of like TV shows that don't hold up, I suppose that like all of us immediately went to, and I think justly so, it's stuff that needs to be discussed. We went to like the most serious aspects of it, but I suppose you could also argue the title also encompasses shows that just don't hold up because they don't hold up based on the production values or the style of the time either, which is not even remotely controversial, but just is. In which case, you could talk that really everything past a certain point starts to lose its ability to stand the test of time.
I was watching some of the cartoons from way long ago. Jason of Star Command. It's like
Right.
a kid's show, and the guy
Exactly.
crashes through what's supposed to be a metal door, and it breaks like wood.
Exactly.
You
So I mean,
gotta love
there's that
Filmation.
too. Yeah. But I mean, I think it does make sense though that clearly the point of this is we're talking about a little bit more of the weightier stuff like we've
Yeah,
been talking about, the kind of subject matter that doesn't travel past a
yeah,
certain point.
yeah, and I think it's also tough too when we talk about classic TV shows that hold up. Because when I think classic, I think before a certain year.
Right.
Like, I don't think I like Cheers. I don't think of it as classic TV. But if we were
Right.
talking about, say, Twilight Zone, I
Sure.
would I wouldn't think like the new one or the 2000 early 2000s revival or
Hmm.
the Straczynski revival from the 80s. I'd think the 59 the original run.
Of
So
course.
that's something
Yeah.
that, you know, but
And
I think it's tough too because right now since everything is content, it's like
mm,
it's hard to make that judgment between what's actually worth my time. Like Pluto TV, there's a Doctor Who channel. I think they might still have a Dark Shadows channel, but they have the Dog of the Bounty Hunter channel. Like nobody cares about Dog the Bounty Hunter.
somebody
Not this
does.
crowd, you know. We're
I know, not our crowd, but
There must be some advertiser somewhere.
I mean, that's the thing though, too. Like you're saying, Gordon, about classic. I mean, also that's a function of us, like our age,
Mhm.
our interests. Like I used to say years ago, I used to talk about how like it was always interesting to me, like when I first started going to Doctor Who conventions, like you meet someone who likes Doctor Who, it was always fascinating how you'd have a lot to talk about because you'd very quickly discover that if you like that, you tended to like 10 other things that we also all like together. So, like, we're all, a lot of us to a certain extent, no matter how far you take the console room community, for instance, we're all very homogenous in some of our likes and the kind of things we gravitate to. I'm sure there's still a lot of variety, but still, ultimately, we're all a console room because Doctor Who. And if you accept that, you're certainly going to have a series of other similar interests that also grow out of that. But they're they ran must see TV on NBC. And for them, that's true. You know, for us, it was contemporary. I still see things from the 80s sometimes and think, surely that's got to be only like 20 years ago. And it's like, no, sorry, old man, it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
But that's the way it is too. And like I used to meet when I used to do I used to curate the pop culture museum. I used to take people on tours, and when I take kids on tours and we'd get to the Star Wars room that had stuff from the 70s, they'd talk about how much they loved the prequels at the time. And at the time I was one of those people. I didn't do it to their face, but I was one of those people who hated the prequels. Like, oh, this is terrible. And then but to them it was pure joy, was the prequels. I remember one kid when I asked him what his favorite movie was, and at that time, all the prequels had been out. And I asked him what his favorite movie was, and he said all of them.
Mhm.
And I thought, how can I argue with that? That's that's what he loves. And now there have been three more, and there's a whole generation that loved those. And they got, and like we've been talking, Doctor Who has got multiple eras. So classic is also a term that is very fluid, and it depends on what your perspective is.
Mhm.
But getting back to our topic, it also means that for many people, there are many different eras in which television no longer works.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And for many of them, that may be television that to us still feels contemporary, but is very much not.
Mhm.
And that's life. So
Okay, so I think we've got about 10 more minutes. So,
yes.
any final thoughts, um, points to argue, recipe tips?
Don't try the tuna madras, is what I would say.
If there's a show you grew up and you really loved and you're worried about going back to visit, maybe just leave it back in your memory. Because
Mm.
sometimes when I revisited some of these shows, it's like, why did I do this? I wasted this time and I really hate myself for what I used to be like. So sometimes, like you were saying, Arnold, just leave them behind,
Mhm.
move on to some other, because there's so much time you've got.
Yeah, and also consider that, you might revisit something and you're not quite comfortable with it, but you can be okay with it. Like one of my go-to comfort watches is The Wild Wild West with Robert
Uh,
Conrad and Ross
Yes.
Martin. You look at the attitudes towards like race and treatment of indigenous people, it's one step above what was going on at the time. but that's good for the mid 60s to early, mid to late 60s.
Correct.
And, there's at least one big action scene where Robert Conrad fights the same three stunt people, but it's just so imaginative and it's so steampunk and so everything else. And there's a great bromance between West and Artemis Gordon that it's like I can kind of forgive the things that bother me don't bother me do kind of bother me, but I get much more enjoyment of it. It's when I watch something like when I watch something that is a little bit more like if you forced me to watch Big Bang Theory, and I took care of I was my mom's living caregiver for a few years and she was an avid fan, and that's no, that's actually against the Geneva Convention, I believe. So okay. Final thoughts?
I'll say, I mean, a lot of what you guys have already said, I treat it on a case by case thing. I think a lot of times, like Kathryn said, is just right. And again, it depends on when you grow up. So like, I'm in my 50s now, and a lot of the things that I grew up with were either repeats from the 50s and 60s or shows that were contemporary with me in the 70s and early 80s, all of which is a minefield of transphobia and sexism and racism and all these things that I appreciate the fact that I'm aware of it now enough to see it and say, that's wrong. And it is very, very troubling to go to things that you once loved and find you can't deal with it anymore. And, but again, I think it's better to know than not, and to try to move forward and to appreciate the fact that we'd like there to be more voices and more availability for everybody to have themselves represented and to feel empathy for each other. So I can't really get too depressed about it, but it's true that once in a while it feels a little sad that you're like leaving pieces behind. But maybe we're supposed to. Some of these shows just don't hold up. So put them away and move on.
Okay, and Kathryn?
Well, I basically kind of mentioned it already, that it's okay to not revisit parts of your childhood, because I'm older than Arnold. It's like, oh yeah, boy, was I growing up at that time. So leaving some things behind and just leaving the pleasant memory there. You're not going back and it's the same way with some of the books I grew up reading way back when. There are some like, I don't need to read that again. Nope.
And I'll finish on the idea that again, no piece of art is perfect. It always reflects the the culture, the mores, and the attitudes of its time, and that sometimes some shows have been willing to outgrow and change with those times. Look at classic Doctor Who, which is freely available on Tubi for your viewing enjoyment. But sometimes it doesn't, and it's okay if you need to step back and say, you know what, this really doesn't interest me anymore. Um, and on that note, I'd like to thank Arnold and Kathryn for participating in today's panel. I want to thank you for coming to this virtual panel at Console Room Year 11. Arnold, Kathryn, and I are in a wide variety of virtual panels throughout the convention. So feel free. I don't know when this is going up, so check it out later this weekend, or if this is shown on Sunday towards the very end of the convention, go back through YouTube and watch all of us archived. Thank you very much for spending time with us, and have a great convention.